I'm a first-generation American on one side, second generation on the other, and part of my family's story, part of my story, part of the kaleidoscope that makes up me, is that my grandmother on my mother's side is a Holocaust survivor, and that's part of where my story begins. When she was a student in Brünn, in what is now the Czech Republic, she was a member of the cell that ended up killing Heydrich, and she was, at the time, a student of medicine, and when the edict was passed that Jews were no longer allowed to study in university, she ended up at a school which taught gymnastics and dance. This is an important point for later, but she was then no longer allowed to go to school and ended up going from house to house to house to house for many months until a member of the underground was caught, later tortured, gave up the names, and the Gestapo started going from house to house until they found and rounded up all the members who had been involved, and then started taking them away to concentration camps and other Verhaftungslagern and other different places. My grandmother was actually arrested by the Gestapo on the night that she was supposed to flee to Switzerland. She had the false papers in her bag, as well as what she told me were cyanide capsules. When I read her memoirs, it says that it was actually poison powder, I suppose you could call it, in her bra. And she had been staying in a safe house, and she went back to get her luggage. She was supposed to cross over the border into Switzerland that night. And as she looked out the window, she saw a long black car pull up and realized that they had come for her. And realized at that point there was no point in running. So she decided that she and her then boyfriend, or her friend, I suppose, would go, and they would go with some respect and with their heads held high. So she ripped up her false papers, and she said that she stood over the toilet and she debated whether or not to take the poison, and decided in the end that no, she would flush it down the toilet, and she decided that she would live. She said later that she couldn't decide whether it was a courageous decision or not. Personally, I think it takes a lot more courage to decide in that moment to live than to die, but she said that she was never quite sure. The Gestapo came into the house. She said that she hid behind a doorway. They, of course, eventually found her, and then they took her with them. And one of the moments, or one of the pieces of the story that I remember best is that as she left, she took with her a green crushed velvet hat. It was her traveling hat, and it was her favorite hat. And as she later recounted to me, she said that she was not going to leave the hat there for somebody else to get their quote-unquote grubby little hands on. And as she left, she said that one of the Gestapo men asked her, "Why are you smiling? We're arresting you. You don't know where we're taking you." And she said, "Well, I do know one thing. I know at least that tonight I know where I'm going to be sleeping." Because, of course, she'd been moving around from place to place to place for many months. And that night they took her to a place where they had been rounding people up. And they had been putting people, when they arrived, they had been putting people through the paces of sort of humiliation. They had been trying to wear people down. So they were putting them through physical exercises, and they were making them do knee bends and jumping jacks and making them run around and sort of seeing who fell over first. And they were separating out men and women and children and basically trying to wear them physically down before they put them on the transports to wherever they were going to take them. And my grandmother, of course, because she had come from a physical education academy, she was in very, very good physical condition, and she was able to withstand. And she said that when she looked around, she realized that she was one of the very few who, at the end of a night, a full night of knee bends, she was one of the very few who was standing. And she got very lucky, possibly because of her physical condition, and also she was in very good mental health as well, or possibly because of her political activities. She was sent to the Kleine Festung in Theresienstadt, rather than to Auschwitz, where the rest of her family went, the rest of my family went. And she was put into a cell with 40 women. She was one of 4 of 40 women who survived. And obviously, that was extraordinarily lucky. I would say one of the most interesting things that I find about serving here in Germany, and one of the things that made me want to come and made me want to serve here in Germany, is the way that Germany chooses to deal with its past and chooses to deal with the memory and the history. And I find it actually a model for the rest of the world. It's something that I studied in graduate school. It's something that I've always been very, very interested in. And I find that the respect and the incredible patience that is taken and the incredible amount of reverence that is paid to both the people and the institutions and to the memory of what has happened before, without being sycophantic or pedantic about it, is really, as I said, a model. So that's my story.